Now, there are two more concepts in the base technique of thrusting salute that I have not mentioned yet. Number one, there is a possible buckle to our opponent's right leg, right after the front kick to his groin. And number two, on the final move of the base technique, on the palm strike, there is a possible inclusion of the concept of threading in order to increase our accuracy. Now, I put both of these concepts or both of these ideas at the end of the explanation of the base technique because they will not always be present. And it doesn't mean that it's wrong when those two ideas are not in the technique because you will not always use them, right? Both the buckle as well as the idea of threading on the last strike of the base technique are to be used when there are specific conditions that are present. So there will be many times when you won't see either one of these two ingredients, and that does not mean that the technique would then be wrong. So let's take a look at the buckle first. All right? And all it really means is that right after we kick and as we are about to do our heel palm to our opponent's jaw, we are also going to buckle his right leg, most likely right at his right knee, as we are planting into our neutral bow stance. So we won't be adding a move. We're just going to take advantage of what is already existing, right? We were already going to do the stance when we dropped down from our kick and we were about to do the heel palm. We were going to go into a neutral bow stance anyhow, but now we're going to use that and we're going to get two purposes or two effects out of this planting into our stance. Number one, we're planting into our stance, which we have to do anyhow for our palm strike. But number two, we're going to attack our opponent's leg at the very same time without spending any extra energy on it. So now we have one basic move accomplish two things, right? Settling into our stance as well as attacking our opponent's right leg and buckling it. And when we do that, when we have a basic that accomplishes more than one thing, it is now dual or multiple in purpose and effect. We're then going to call this a sophisticated basic. Most of the basics that you first learn in Kenpo are embryonic basics. In other words, they accomplish one thing, a block or a strike or a stance or a foot maneuver that does just that one thing. A block that just blocks, for example, is an embryonic basic. It accomplishes one thing. But a sophisticated basic, like we have here, is still only one move, but it accomplishes at least two things. And that means that now we have, within the span of only about 1 second, we get three effective strikes, right? We get the kick, the buckle against his knee, as well as a palm strike to his chin, all within less than a second. We just have to remember that the buckle is only going to be possible if our opponent's leg is close enough for us to buckle it. We can't chase that leg if it's out of position. The buckle will only be possible if our opponent's leg is in position to be buckled. We won't be compromising the palm strike for it. Now, let's talk about threading, because that is the one other concept that Mr. Parker introduced in this technique. And quite frankly, in his later years, Mr. Parker was quite adamant about teaching that in this technique. But we do have to keep in mind that threading is not always going to occur. The whole purpose of threading is to be able to strike a target without having to look, without seeing it. Once we use the concept of threading, we can literally strike our opponent's target with our eyes closed. Now, how is that possible? Well, the most basic idea about threading is simply this. Your right hand is always going to be able to find your left hand no matter where your left hand is. You don't have to look. Try it right now. One hand can find the other hand even with your eyes closed, right? So that means that if we have our left hand on our opponent's chest, right below his chin, our right hand can find that now. Our right hand can use the location of our left hand as a physical guide in order to execute that right palm to the chin. We don't need to look. So why would we do that? Well, the main reason for striking without looking is environment, and the most common reason for that would actually be multiple opponents. There is an incredible advantage in being able to strike opponent number one while you're already looking at opponent number 2. Clearly, this means you can respond to your second opponent sooner. And there's a great intimidation factor involved in this too. Just imagine that you're facing an opponent who's looking at you while they're striking another opponent accurately. That is a great advantage when it comes to multiple opponents. So does it make sense to use threading when there's only one opponent? Not really. Unless you have really bad aim. The concept of threading does introduce an extra step in your sequence. It does make it a little bit more difficult, could make it a little bit longer. And it's only necessary if you need more accuracy. So typically when we deal with one opponent, we don't use threading. But when we have multiple opponents or simply need to scan our environment, then we are going to use threading. And that means that if you're practicing this technique, you will have to practice these two different modes, so to speak, right? One without threading because you can see what's going on. One with threading because you have to scan your environment or deal with a second opponent. Okay?